The Peter Schiff Show.
Today's podcast is sponsored by NetSuite, the easy-to-use cloud-based business management software for every aspect of your business. By popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible finance program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/gold.
Well, we've had a hell of a week. A lot to talk about on today's podcast. We have the Powell Jackson Hole speech from earlier this morning. We've got the Democratic National Convention, which took place pretty much all week, came to a end on Thursday. I unfortunately I sat through much of that fiasco there. Very embarrassing, I think, as an American, having to witness that. And then today we had the decision by Robert Kennedy Jr. to basically drop out, pause his campaign, and endorse Donald Trump. And in fact, just before I sat down to do this podcast, I was listening to the rally in Arizona where Donald Trump and Robert Kennedy Jr. appeared together. Massive crowds, lots of applause. And so I'm going to get to that in a bit, but I want to start with the Powell Jackson Hole speech, which is exactly the speech that I had been anticipating that he was going to give. It was the concession speech. Really, it was a surrender. But I've been saying that the Fed was going to cut rates in September. In fact, before the July meeting, I said I think the Fed should probably cut in July, but if they don't, they're going to do September for sure, because I thought there would be a big market decline if they didn't cut in July. They didn't cut in July, and we got the market decline. But that decline was reversed not only by the Fed basically indicating that it was going to cut, but all of the big players in the financial markets started demanding emergency cuts. We need cuts. We need cuts. And then the Bank of Japan also cooperated by calling off its future hike. So I knew that we were going to get a cut in September. And I also knew this because the markets were pricing it in. The markets finally expected the Fed to cut, and I knew the Fed was going to deliver on those expectations. But he had to lay the foundation for that during his Jackson Hole speech, which he did today. And during this speech, Powell said that now, finally, after all of these months, now I'm convinced that inflation is headed back down to 2%. But why? What data have we seen that has shown a significant improvement that you would think that inflation's headed back down to 2%? It's 3% right now. Now, he claimed it was 2.5% because he's using maybe some kind of PCE core. But if you look at the actual CPI, we got 2.9 was the last one. We got to 3% over a year ago. So we've been hanging out around 3% for the last year. No new data points have come out that suggests that 3% is about to become 2%. But now that Powell has indicated that we're going to start cutting rates, there's no chance that 3% is going to become 2%. It's going to go to 4, 5, 6. It's going to keep going up. The real reason that Jerome Powell is thrown in the towel on the inflation fight, although he wants to pretend he won the fight, right, is because of the economy. And he even mentioned that during his speech today. He said that any additional weakness in the labor market is unwelcome. See, before he was saying we wanted some weakness in the labor market because that's how we were going to bring down inflation. But now, based on all of the weak data that we got on the labor market, especially that last non-farm payroll report, he's saying no mas. We can't have any more weakness in the labor market. So the Fed has really pivoted now from fighting inflation to fighting unemployment, which is on the rise. And the Fed, claims it has this dual mandate. One is for price stability, which it's redefined as rising prices, and the other is a low unemployment. And it now realizes that part of its mandate is in jeopardy. And of course, the idea, and I've debunked that on the podcast, that we have low unemployment is a farce. We don't have low unemployment. We're just not counting all the people that are unemployed as being unemployed. If you want to see what the real unemployment rate is, and that's not even all of it, look at the U6 numbers. I talked about this in the last podcast. They are historically high already, and they're going to get a lot higher. In fact, another data point that came out during the week was the downward revision by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. These are the guys that give us these non-farm payroll reports every week. And now they came out exactly like I said they would do. I've been saying this for months and months and months on my podcast. They came out and they revised down the whole year, all the job reports for the past year, or I think year to date, or past year. And they said, you know what? We actually created 818,000 fewer jobs than what we reported. That's 68,000 jobs a month. That is a big number. Basically, they went from an average of 242,000 jobs a month to 174,000. And it probably means that most of the months where the markets were celebrating a beat, it was actually a miss. And that's why I kept saying on this podcast, these numbers mean nothing because they're going to revise them down. And of course, even without the revisions, they were all a bunch of BS. I knew that. When you look at the household survey, you can see all the real jobs being lost, full-time jobs being destroyed, replaced by part-time jobs for people who are forced to moonlight because that's the only way to pay the rent or to put food on the table. And so it's all part-time jobs, jobs that are going to immigrants. So I knew this was all a bunch of BS. Plus, so many of the jobs are government jobs. Where are those jobs coming from? Well, we're running bigger deficits to create these jobs that do nothing to add any productivity to the economy. So we're just paying people to consume because they're not producing anything when they're getting a check from the government. When they're productive is when they get a check in the private sector for actually helping to make something or provide a service that people want. People don't want what the government is providing. They're just basically providing a bunch of red tape. They're making it harder for the rest of us to be productive. But I knew we were going to get this downward revision. Now, I was thinking they would hold off until after the election. So I was kind of surprised that they, showed their cards so soon before the election. Maybe they felt that they could do it because, Kamala had shot up in the polls. And so, when Biden was there, it was like he had no shot. So maybe they wouldn't have done it, but maybe they thought, okay, we can do some of the revisions. But I don't even think it's enough. I think that there's going to be another revision after the election because I think it should be bigger than 818,000. I think there's more jobs, but even the 818,000, I think this is the second biggest revision ever. And of course, it's not a coincidence that they overreported the jobs, right? They don't go back and say, hey, we actually created a lot more jobs than we told you. No, the revisions are all down. And that's because the government was biased in trying to come up with a big number. And so that's why you had all these numbers that were overestimating what actually happened. And so now they're going back and they're correcting it. And I think more corrections are coming. But Powell got this information during the week. And now he realizes, oh, my God, we don't have all the jobs that we thought. The unemployment rate just spiked up. Even the U3 number that we use is at 4.2 and rising because it was down a lot lower. And so now the Fed is worried about the economy, about employment. They're not coming right out and saying they're really worried. They're still pretending that we have a good economy. Well, if the economy really was good, they wouldn't be cutting rates because there's no indication that inflation is going to go down. In fact, there's every indication that inflation is going to go up. If you want to look at the market data points, look at the price of gold. Mentioned that on last Friday's podcast, where gold closed above 2,500 for the first time ever. It closed a week above 2,500, and it closed this week above 2,500. Despite a big sell-off yesterday, we recovered those losses today, and we closed at a new record weekly close at 25.13. That was about a $5 move up from the record weekly close last week. Intra-week, we set a new record high for gold. We got above 5,000, got above 2,530. I forget exactly what the peak was, maybe 32-ish, around there. But gold prices keep going up. Gold stocks didn't have that big a week. Many of the big name stocks did hit new 52-week highs today, and the GDX managed to hit a 52-week high, but the GDXJ, the juniors, did not. And we're only up about 1% on the week. So not a big move up, but no move down, right? The market didn't fall. And gold basically moved last week in anticipation of this week. And when I did the podcast last week, I was telling people, hey, you should go to Shift Gold over the weekend and buy some gold because we could have a big move up on Sunday night, Monday. And that didn't happen. But you know what? It may happen this Sunday night or Monday. So you have another opportunity. If you didn't buy gold this week or last weekend, you can go to shiftgold.com this weekend and load up your shopping cart and check out with some gold or silver, because one of these Sunday nights, it's going to take off. That's when I think the big move is probably going to start in Asia while Americans are asleep. And based on what Powell said and how dovish he was on Friday, we'll see how this goes over, because it's not just gold. Look at the dollar. The dollar got clobbered again this week. The dollar index closed at 100.68. This is the lowest it's been in 13 months. And if it falls a little bit more, it's going to be the lowest it's been in several years. But then there's no real support. I think the bottom could drop out of the US dollar. I think we have a chance before the end of this year to get the dollar index below 90, and that will challenge the low from 2020. And if we take that out, then Katie, bar the door, because we're just going to go through a trapdoor. And in fact, where the dollar looks the weakest is against the Swiss franc. The dollar is about 7.5% from hitting a new all-time record low against the Swiss franc. Take a look at this chart. In fact, the chart for the dollar index closing at the low of the day, this looks horrible. And the Swiss franc right now, you need $1.18 to buy a Swiss franc. In 1971, when we went off the gold standard, you could buy a Swiss franc for 23 cents. So the Swiss franc has gone up fivefold against the US dollar since 1971. Now, of course, the Swiss franc has also lost purchasing power over that time. There's been inflation in Switzerland. So the Swiss franc doesn't buy today what it bought in 1971, but a lot more than the dollar does, because you have an 80% decline in the value of the dollar versus the Swiss franc. So the Swiss franc has been a much better currency to have held over those decades than the dollar. And it's kind of like a canary in the currency coal mine, in that when there's a problem with the dollar relative to other currencies, you might see it first in the Swiss franc. It's a smaller currency, maybe not as much liquidity as the euro or the yen. And you're seeing some real pronounced weakness in the dollar against the Swiss franc. But what no one is really paying attention to is the inflationary implications of what's going on. See, the Fed is about to cut rates with gold at an all-time record high and the dollar breaking down. Why would you do that? Also, prices in general are at record highs. There is no indication that, we've whipped inflation. All the indications are that inflation has whipped us, and it's about to whip us even more. But look at what happened with the dollar index, because the main reason that inflation came down year over year from 9% to 3% was because we had a huge dollar rally that made that happen. The dollar index rose from May of 2021 to October of 2022. It was a 24% rise in the value of the dollar relative to all the currencies in that basket. That dollar strength is what brought down commodity prices, because they're all dollar priced. Brought down oil, brought down a lot of other prices. And that is what made possible the decline in the year over year inflation rates. We went from 9% all the way down to 3%. That happened because of the strong dollar. Now, why did the dollar rally? Well, because everybody started to anticipate all the rate hikes, and that caused the dollar to go up, which brought commodity prices down, which helped bring the CPI down. So it wasn't necessarily the rate hikes that did it. It was the impact those hikes had on the exchange rate of the dollar. Well, now the dollar index is falling. In fact, it's already down 10% from its peak, and it looks like it's about to collapse another 10% very quickly. And so we're going to eradicate all of those gains. But now the dollar weakness is going to do to the CPI the opposite of what dollar strength did. So a strong dollar brought down the CPI. A weak dollar is going to push it back up. And so now we're going to see the reversal, where now the year over year numbers are going to go from 3% back up to 9%. And in fact, they're going to go higher than 9%. So the Fed is pivoting at the wrong time, but it has no choice as far as it knows, because it's worried about the collateral damage that's been done to the economy while it was pretending to fight inflation. And I say pretend because it never really got rates high enough for a real battle. We never actually had restrictive policy. Even though Powell kept talking about how long policy has been restrictive, we only got to 5.25. That's not restrictive. And you can tell by the debt we had, while the Fed was supposedly having tight money, we had record government deficits, record private household deficits. Everybody went on a borrowing and spending binge. That's not tight money. That's easy money, right? The Fed didn't have the guts to tighten enough because it was worried about the economy and about a financial crisis. Well, now it realizes that even though they didn't tighten enough, the little bit they did was enough. The Fed, gets the economy all juiced up on cheap money. They build the entire phony recovery on a foundation of artificially low interest rates. And as a result, everybody goes into debt. And now they think they can raise interest rates without having a collapse. That's impossible. You can't have a foundation built on debt and then raise interest rates and expect the foundation not to collapse, because now people have to service all that debt that they accumulated when rates were cheap. Well, they can't do it anymore. And so now the Fed is going to have to go back to cutting rates because of the damage that was done by allowing them to rise. But they're doing it at a time where inflation is already elevated. So we're going to start from a high level and go much higher. Unfortunately, nobody seems to be prepared for that inevitability. Anyway, we got a quick commercial, so we'll take a quick one break and be right back.
Here's some quick math. The less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your products or services, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With NetSuite, you'll reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud with no hardware requirement, access from anywhere. You cut the costs of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies have already made the move. So do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. By popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible finance program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/gold.
Another thing that Powell talked about at this Jackson Hole speech that bothered me was that he tried to explain why we have inflation or kind of the origins of the whole problem. And he did talk about the government's response to COVID, the fiscal response, the monetary policy response, but he basically had nothing but praise. He was saying this is what we had to do. We saved the economy. There was going to be a huge, depression or whatever it was, and so we spent all this money and we printed all this money. Yes, but those were mistakes. We didn't have to do that. We shouldn't have done that. I said that in real time. I pointed out how bad these mistakes were, that it was the worst combination of monetary and fiscal policy that I'd ever seen. Now they say, well, we had to do something because the economy was shut down for COVID. Well, we didn't even have to shut it down. And I think had the American public not been fooled by the politicians into thinking that the shutdown was going to be free, if the government hadn't said, don't worry about staying home because we're going to send you a check, and don't worry about your rent, you don't have to pay it. Don't worry about your student loans, we don't have to pay those either. The government made it very easy to get the public to agree to shut down the economy. Well, if they hadn't done that, if they said, well, yeah, you're tough luck, they couldn't have done it. We would have kept the economy open and everything would have been fine because the whole thing was a myth. We didn't have to stay at home. We didn't have to quarantine ourselves. But part of the reason that we fell for that was the idea that, well, we're just going to get money from the government. We don't have to worry about our lost paychecks. We don't have to worry about not paying our rent or our student loans. In fact, a lot of people liked their lifestyle under COVID. You didn't have to work and you got all this money. So it was a mistake. The fiscal and monetary policy was a mistake. That's why inflation got as bad as it did. It was going to go up anyway from a lot of the money that we printed while Trump was in. And we printed money while Obama was there. So inflation was going up anyway. But this just really accelerated it based on the amount of money we've printed. And we haven't even felt all of it yet. We haven't even dealt with all of the price hikes that are still coming from the inflation that was created during COVID. I mean, that's coming up next. But Powell didn't really blame any of it. He was like, well, we had to do this. And then, prices went up. And he mentioned the fact that, we originally thought it was transitory, and so did everybody else. No, everybody else didn't think it was transitory. I was one of the people who kept saying that inflation is as transitory as subprime was contained. It was obvious that it wasn't transitory, but the Fed was just afraid to act because it didn't want to, raise rates based on all the debt. They only acted when they had no choice because inflation was such a big problem, they couldn't ignore it anymore. So they kept hiking rates until the banks started to fail. That's when they stopped hiking. It wasn't because they beat inflation. It was because their attempt to beat inflation beat the banks. It exposed the flaw in the insolvent financial system, and they had to call off the hikes in order to prop up the financial system. But now they have to start cutting rates because the financial system can't handle rates where they are. In fact, the only reason we've been able to handle that 5% rate is because the markets have expected rate cuts. That's why the long end of the curve, even though the Fed was up at 5%, the long end was still below 4%. It should have been 7 or 8%. The only reason it wasn't was because everybody knew the Fed was going to start cutting. But if the bond market knew that they couldn't cut, well, then long rates would have gone up and then we would have seen another collapse. But I think long rates are going to go up anyway, because what's going to happen is when inflation goes up instead of down, but the economy goes into recession, and now the Fed is sidelined. There's no way the Fed is going to fight inflation when we're in recession. The bond market's going to get killed. That's why this next recession is going to be so brutal, because it's going to be accompanied by rising prices and rising long-term interest rates. We've never had that, at least not recently, because Americans have always been able to count on lower rates. So yes, it's a recession, but I can refinance my mortgage and save some money. Well, no, that's not going to happen, because rates are going to go up during the recession, and so are consumer prices. Anyway, I want to start talking about politics, because there's a lot of political news that came out this week. The first one was this Democratic National Convention, 4 days of utter nonsense. And, I reposted, if you haven't seen it, go watch my my troll of the 2012 DNC, where I went around and asked the delegates if they would support my my plan to ban profits. And look at how many delegates supported this socialist plan that I had. And so that's how I knew that Kamala's socialist price controls would have a lot of support, when there's already a bunch of Marxists that are already there at the Democratic National Convention. But what stood out in my mind about this convention, and I've watched a number of these over the years. I've been to a couple of them, not as a delegate. I was there on a press pass. Never been a delegate. But I've never seen a convention where they vilified the opposition, the opponent, anywhere near to the degree that they vilified Trump. I thought that they would have had to have backed off on that kind of characterization, given the fact that someone tried to kill him, right? They made Trump so evil, they made him the next Adolf Hitler, that somebody thought it was their patriotic duty to kill him, right? So I thought they were going to have to dial that back. Now they didn't compare him to Hitler, but they did claim that he wants to be a dictator, that he's going to end freedom as we know it, use the presidency to commit all these crimes. I mean, all this nonsense. Supreme Court didn't do that. They're misinterpreting what the Supreme Court said, or deliberately misrepresenting it. The thing about it is, I don't know if I've ever seen so many lies told, like, in succession in such a short period of time about Trump, right? Most of what they talked about Trump nonstop, right? I don't know why, I'm sure they must have, Trump dartboards there, where people are throwing darts at him, or, who knows what they're doing. But, it was like a punching bag, and it's all anti-Trump. It was much more a negative about Trump than positive about Kamala, because, of course, there's nothing positive about her. I mean, they still managed to pretend that she's achieved these great successes, and that Biden has achieved a great success. What did he achieve? What success has there been under the Biden administration? He keeps talking about all the jobs he created. He didn't create anything. He keeps counting all the jobs that were there before he was president. Those are the jobs he claims credit for having created. The jobs where people were furloughed due to COVID, and then COVID is over, and the employers recall all the people, hey, come back to work. And now those people come back to the jobs they already have. And Biden's like, you see, look, I created those jobs. He didn't create anything. We actually lost full-time jobs since Biden's been president. And the fact that so many people are moonlighting right now, I mean, what if Biden ran, if his campaign, when he ran against Trump, was vote for me and I'll make it so you need a second job. Vote for me and you'll have 2 or 3 jobs instead of 1. Forget about having weekends with your family or being able to relax at night. You're going to have a second job. You're going to work an evening job, and then you're going to work over the weekend just so you can pay your rent and pay the grocery bills. Would people have voted for those type of jobs? Because those are the jobs that Biden created, right? Jobs that people didn't want, that they wish they didn't have, but unfortunately they've got no choice because the economy is so bad that they've got to work 2 or 3 jobs, right? There is no success. They're touting this guy as if he's had this great presidency. It's been a complete and utter failure. Look at the national debt has skyrocketed. He's going to beat Trump's record for the most debt in any one term. Why are you going to celebrate that? I mean, what did we get for all this debt? Nothing. The economy is in much worse shape now than it was before we borrowed all this money. And now we have this bad economy with even more debt that we have to service. So it's been one big disaster. And what has Kamala done? All they do, they talk about her great success as a prosecutor. I mean, first of all, so what? She was a prosecutor she had a government job. I don't even think she was probably that good a prosecutor. She might not have even been a mediocre prosecutor. But that's her career. I was a lawyer for the government. I prosecuted people. That's all she's ever done. I mean, what the hell is that? It's like she hasn't even really accomplished anything, compared to, they're trashing Trump, who actually had a business, grew a business, created wealth, employed people, did a lot of stuff. What did Kamala Harris ever do? She hasn't done anything, right? But they're trying to act like she's got all these accomplishments. But even then, they barely focused on these fake accomplishments, right? Because there's only so much airtime you could devote to fluff. They spend almost all their time lying about Trump. Most of the things, almost everything actually, that they accuse Trump of doing or wanting to do, he's not going to do. And they repeated all these lies where they take things out of context, like the bloodbath or bad people on both sides or whatever it is, or, all these quotes that have already been proven were either not said or were taken out of context and don't even apply to the way they're using them. And despite the fact that they've been thoroughly debunked, they all regurgitated them again as if they had nothing else to do but repeat these same lies. But even things like Social Security, they kept saying, oh, Donald Trump's going to slash Social Security. He's going to cut Social Security. I mean, I wish he was going to do stuff like that. We need to cut Social Security. But Donald Trump's never said anything about cutting Social Security. In fact, he wants to increase Social Security. He wants to make Social Security benefits tax-free. That's the same thing as increasing Social Security. So Donald Trump is running on a campaign of increasing Social Security benefits, right? Something that I disagree with. Now, I think we should remove the tax, but we have to find another way to cut the overall benefits, because the tax on benefits is an incentive not to work. So we don't want to disincentivize people who might otherwise work from working, but Social Security is broke. So we got to find ways to cut the spending. But Trump's not talking about that. He's talking about increasing Social Security spending. And the Democrats are saying he's going to cut Social Security. And he already was president for 4 years and didn't make any cuts to Social Security, which was part of the problem, right? So there are things about Trump that I like, and there are things about Trump that I don't like. And one of them is that he's not doing anything about government spending. Or even in today's rally, he talks about tariffs. He goes, oh, the tariffs aren't taxes. Of course they're taxes. He's denying that. He says, well, the foreigners pay those taxes. No, they don't. Americans pay those taxes. But, I prefer tariffs to an income tax. The government's got to generate revenue. Kamala Harris was talking about how bad it was that Trump wants to impose tariffs. Well, okay, what are they going to do to get revenue? And their only plan is, well, let's tax the rich, right? They want to jack the capital gains tax rate up to 45, 49%. They're even talking about a 25% tax on unrealized gains, which of course would be unconstitutional because unrealized gains are not income. They're property. If you're going to tax me on my stock or my real estate, and you're going to tax me simply because the value is increased, you're not taxing income, you're taxing property, because I haven't sold the property, I haven't realized any income. So you're making me pay a tax because I own property, and that is a direct tax, and it needs to be apportioned. And so they're going to try to claim that it's income and that they can tax it, which they can't. But forget about the constitutionality. It's just horrible economics. It just can't work. It'd be a disaster for the country if they ever were able to impose such a tax. But that's all that they're talking about as far as raising taxes. But they don't even talk about like we got to reduce the deficit, that we need to raise taxes or cut spending because we have the deficits. And of course, Trump doesn't talk about that either. But at least Trump wants to eliminate a lot of regulations. The Democrats want more regulations. We got too many regulations. So removing regulations, that's the low-hanging fruit. That doesn't cost anything. And the minute you get rid of a lot of regulations, you make the economy more productive. That automatically generates more tax revenue, but that also helps lower prices. Now, it's not going to be enough, but it's better than nothing, right? Removing regulations is better than adding additional regulations. So the Trump plan is not nearly as bad as the Harris plan. But the point I'm making is all they did was tell one lie after another about Trump and what he wants to do. I don't know that the media, right, because the media is totally in the pocket of the Democrats. Are they going to fact check any of this nonsense? Are they going to come out and point out all of the lies? Like, I remember one lie. They said, Trump wants to eliminate the Department of Education, which maybe he does. I mean, they kept trying to, pin the Project 2025 on Trump, even though that was done by a think tank that's got nothing to do with Trump. In fact, in his rally today, I don't know, he said, I've never even heard of that project, which obviously he must have heard of it because they keep on talking about it. But they're misrepresenting what that project is, right? So they're trying to pretend this fascist manifesto or something, but it's about shrinking government and about making government smaller because we can't afford it. We got to find ways of cutting back on government. And one of the things they want to do is eliminate the Department of Education. Trump has talked about doing that as well. But the way they framed it, they said, hey, we got to Trump wants to get rid of the Department of Education, which is what funds our public schools. So they're applying that Trump wants to get rid of public schools. That if we get rid of the Department of Education, well, we're not going to have any more public schools, which is a bunch of nonsense. The Department of Education doesn't finance public schools. Public schools are financed predominantly by local tax revenue, mostly property taxes. That's how it's been. The first public school in America was established in 1635, right? We weren't even officially America yet. We were just a bunch of colonies. And this was in the Massachusetts colony. They had a public school. So for 330, 40 years, we had public schools before we finally got the Department of Education in 1979. That's when it was established. It didn't go into effect until 1980. It was one of two departments that Jimmy Carter established. One was education and the other was energy. Now, when Ronald Reagan ran for president, his initial platform was getting rid of both of those departments that were started by Carter. The problem was once he got there, even after a few years, they had already built up a big enough constituency in Washington that he couldn't get rid of them. And now we've been stuck with them. And just like the Department of Energy hasn't produced a single barrel of oil, the Department of Education is not educating our kids. In fact, we had much better public schools before we had a Department of Education. And so we don't need it. And any money the Department of Education spends would be better left in the states. Remember, the federal government doesn't have any money that it doesn't first take from the states, from the people. And so even if the schools get some of that money back, they'd be better off if the money never left their state in the first place. And then if the local government wants to increase taxes, they can do it without having to waste so much of it, right? You send your tax money to Washington, D.C., you send $1, and by the time you get it back, maybe there's 10 cents left. So just leave the dollar in the states to begin with and let the states spend it. But they try to act as if Trump wants to get rid of public schools because he wants to defund the Department of Education when it's done nothing to improve our education. Our education is a disaster. Look at how low our kids rank globally based on how bad our public schools are. In fact, I don't know if you've ever tried this. You can go online. I didn't do it before the podcast, but I've done it where you look at some of these exams that were given, and 100 years ago, sixth grade exams, fifth grade exams, that you can see examples of these. And, they're mathematics, English, geography. I challenge most adults to pass these tests. I mean, sixth graders 100 years ago probably were better educated and knew more than the average high school grad does today through public schools. That's how bad the public schools have become with the Department of Education. So we should get rid of that department. But the point I was making here is that they're just lying about it. They're trying to scare people. Vote for Trump and the public schools are going to go away. Your Social Security is going to go away. The reality is Social Security is going away anyway, regardless of who we vote for, even if nobody cuts it, because the dollar is going to crash. The benefits aren't going to be worth anything when you get them, because no politicians have the integrity to cut them. Now, maybe Trump will be different in his second term. Maybe as things really start to get bad, he'll listen to reason. I mean, I think at least Trump cares. I think he cares about the country. I mean, sure, he wanted the presidency, to go well, because his ego would say, hey, I'm the president, so we have to have a great economy. But when there is a real currency crisis and a sovereign debt crisis, and he's presented with the alternatives, maybe he'll choose the right one. Because I know for a fact that there's no way that the Harris administration would ever choose the right one. They want a socialist economy. So all they're going to do is take advantage of whatever crisis there is to move the country further down that road to serfdom, right? They'll just try to blame anything bad that happens on capitalism. And they'll say, you see, this is why things are so bad, because we still have too much capitalism. We got to get rid of the vestiges of capitalism that we have left. We have to go all in on socialism, on communism, because again, her dad was a communist professor who she grew up with communism. So she will take advantage of any crisis to further that agenda and blame anything that goes wrong on greedy corporations and the evil capitalist system that exploits everybody. Donald Trump isn't going to do that, right? So Donald Trump's goal is not to create a socialist America. So he won't blame the crisis on the free market. So maybe he'll blame it on government and government spending and central bank money printing, and we'll have the opportunity to have a real solution. Another thing that happened, though, today that I think is a big benefit to the Trump ticket and a well-deserved slap in the face to the Democratic Party was the defection of Robert Kennedy Jr. Now, I was never a big fan of the Kennedys, although he wasn't nearly as bad as Lyndon Johnson, right? But he still was, a guy that wanted to expand the government. And so he was a Democrat, and I always thought he was kind of overrated as a president. A lot of people ranked him as one of the top presidents, and the fact that he was assassinated probably raised his popularity. But he was a young guy, good-looking guy, had a pretty wife, and so he and the family, the Kennedy family, was kind of like the closest thing to royalty that we have in America. Because we don't have kings, we don't have a royal family, but they were kind of like a political dynasty. And the family was very wealthy, and so then you had all these the kids that got into politics, and people followed the Kennedys, right? It was so like in the UK, they followed the royal family. In the 1960s, 70s, 80s, we had the Kennedys, and they were kind of like our royalty. But as a president, I was never that big a fan, because I liked Barry Goldwater and that kind of I was libertarian, free market. A lot of these social programs, these grandiose ideas, I want the free market to solve those problems. I know that any problem that exists, the free market is going to solve it much better than government. In fact, government's not going to solve it at all. Government's going to make any problem they try to solve worse. So you want to keep government away and allow the free market to function and allow the invisible hand to work so that all the various individuals, men and women, could start businesses and figure out what needs are unmet and then satisfy them to enrich themselves. And by an invisible hand, they're going to end up helping everybody. So the best way to solve any problem is through free market capitalism. And so I didn't like a lot of the things that Kennedy was doing. Now, compared to the Democrats we have today, the guy was, he was great, right? Compared to, Biden or Obama, yeah, I would take Kennedy in a heartbeat. But I think that his nephew, Robert Kennedy Jr., I mean, there are a lot of things that I disagree with. And, when he endorsed Trump, he says, look, there's a lot of things that Trump and I disagree on. And there's things that I disagree on with Trump, and there's things that I disagree with Robert Kennedy. But Kennedy and Trump agree on some important things, and that's why they've been outsiders. And that's why the Republican establishment was so against Donald Trump, and the Democratic establishment was so against Robert Kennedy. I mean, if there had been primaries, he probably would have won, right? There's no way Joe Biden could have debated Robert Kennedy, so he didn't have any debates. There's no way Kamala Harris could have won debates against Robert Kennedy, so they didn't have him, right? They snuck her in there. They found a way to give her the nomination without her having to face any real competition because she would have lost. But it's very corrupt. Kamala Harris, they can't control Robert Kennedy because he actually cares. Even though he's not right on all the issues, he cares. I can tell the guy is sincere. He's a smart guy who actually cares about the country, and he's honest. He's telling the truth, right? And I'd rather have honest people. I mean, it's rare. And the reason that these guys are honest, the reason that Donald Trump is not the big liar. Yes, he says some things that aren't true because that's the salesman in Trump. He's a salesman, so he's puffing things up. I mean, that's his personality, right? Everything is the greatest. Everything is the best, even though it's really not. That's just how he is. That's how he's lived his life, and it served him in business. He made a lot of money. He's very successful entrepreneur. So what? He inherited some money from his dad. He made a lot more than he inherited. And there are a lot of people, especially on the left, they inherit a lot of money from their father, from their grandfather. They have a trust. They don't accomplish anything. They just spend it, right? Anybody can inherit money and spend it. It's another thing to inherit money and then grow it into a bigger fortune than what you got. Now, is it better to start with something than start with nothing? Sure. But a lot of people, again, that inherit money are lazy because they inherit money. They don't work hard because they don't have to. So the fact that he inherited money and then just didn't squander it like a playboy on booze and women, right? No, he actually worked. And the other thing I always admired about Donald Trump was his children. Because as a father, I look at the children that he's raised. He did a hell of a job raising those children, right? And so that's an important quality. I mean, you don't get children like that by accident, right? So he was a good father, and he raised some, extremely capable children. You don't have any of that with Harris, right? I mean, but so he's not really lying the way the Democrats are doing. He cares. He wants to make the country better. That's obvious, right? Could he have done a much better job as president? Yes, he could have. And again, I think that he had a lot of advisors around him. Hopefully, he'll have better advisors the next time around. But he didn't start any wars. He doesn't want any wars. Kamala Harris couldn't give a damn about all the people in Russia and the Ukraine who are dying. I've been talking about this for 2 years when I pointed out back then that this whole war could have been avoided and should have been avoided, but we stopped the peace, and all the blood is on our hands, and they don't even care. At least Robert Kennedy and Donald Trump care about all these people who are dying, and they want to stop it. Now, secondary, we're wasting all this money so all these innocent people could die. And for what reason? Ukraine is in much worse shape now than it was 2 years ago. For what? For nothing. Again, there was more freedom in Russia than the Ukraine before the whole thing started. So it wasn't like, we were trying to preserve Ukrainian freedom. They're less free now than they were before because of this war. It's been perpetrated for our benefit, whatever, military industrial complex, whatever the reason was for doing this. But this has been a disaster. So at least you've got Kennedy and Trump that are thorns in the side of the political establishment, and that's what we need. We need to break the stranglehold of the neocons on the economy, on the on the whole military industrial defense. Now, the other thing that Kennedy really wants to get involved in is food and health and nutrition. And I mean, maybe he's got some points there. I know the regulatory agencies are always very corrupted and captured by some of the companies who are regulated. That's why you want to get the government out of it. It's whenever you have this type of corruption, where you have private companies that have captured government agencies and then use those government agencies in a way that harms the public, the problem isn't the companies, it's the government. Because without the government club, they'd have nothing, right? But once you give them the government power that they can use, they'll abuse it, right? But it's the power, the government power, that needs to be removed in the first place. Because if there's no government club, then nobody can hit anybody with it. And so it's getting rid of all these rules and regulations and agencies so we can have a real free market and let free market competition give us healthy food, right? That's what I want. I don't really want some grand group of government central planners, planning our diet and deciding what we should eat and what we shouldn't eat. But I want the government to get out of the way to remove all these agencies that are leading to the outcomes that Kennedy is pointing out are the reason that Americans as a society are so unhealthy. We're not just so unhealthy relative to the past, but we're very unhealthy relative to everybody else in the present. And the question is why? At least he's asking these questions. And hopefully the answers to these questions, the solution to this problem, is rolling back government regulations, agencies, and departments and freeing up the free market to solve this health crisis, because the government's not going to do it. Any problem, as I said, the best solution to that problem is the government. Anyway, before I end today's podcast, I wanted to point out that I am going to be live at the Money Show in Orlando, October 17th through the 19th. They have a special website to sign up if you're a fan of the podcast. There's some type of discount on there. It's shift.moneyshow.com. Now, the Money Show used to be free. Now it's free if you just want to go to the exhibit hall. So I'll be down there. We'll have a booth. I'll have a couple of reps. So if you just want to say hi and you're in Orlando, you can sign up and go to the exhibit hall for free. But if you want to go to my workshops, I got a couple of those. You want to go to all the talks, then you got to pay something. So that's part of the inflation. Used to be free. Now it costs about $100 to $150. I think it's a little less with my discount than $150, but you'll see it on there. But definitely worth it because you got 2 or 3 days. You got a lot of different people giving talks. There's a lot of good guys that are going to be there, friends of mine, and we'll be there. So it's going to be in Orlando. Again, I'm going to have, I don't know if I'm going to have my kids with me at the Money Show. I'll see. We're all going down there because whenever we go to Orlando, there's a bunch of theme parks. And so the kids are like, you're going to Orlando, we got to go, right? Because there's these theme parks there. And so we'll be there. But that is in October 17th through the 19th. Again, take advantage. Gold has not exploded above 2,500. What are you waiting for? If you don't own it, buy it. And again, if you really want to profit, these gold stocks, they are close, in my opinion, to just an explosive move up. it's kind of amazing that they're still as cheap as they are. And so you want to buy those. You can't buy these over the weekend now. The markets are closed. You're going to wait until Monday in order to buy those. But you can buy the bullion 24/7 at Shift Gold. But on Monday, you can buy gold stocks. You can buy my fund, the Euro Pacific Gold Fund. EPGIX is the no-load symbol of the gold fund. You can get it at any of the discount brokerage firms, or call up the representatives at Euro Pacific Asset Management. The website is europac.com. And talk about our gold fund and our separately managed gold strategies, as well as all of our strategies to get you out of the US dollar, out of harm's way, and protect your purchasing power. Also, don't forget shiftsovereign.com. Sign up if you're not currently getting our free newsletter. Make sure you go to shiftsovereign.com and sign up for it. In fact, if you got a few bucks, sign up for Shift Sovereign Premium. It's well worth it. You get a 30-day free trial. You don't like it, get all your money back. No questions asked. Again, you like today's podcast, give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment. I may, in fact, do a Spaces. I didn't do it last Sunday night because nothing was really happening. But if we do get some action on Sunday night, some big events happening, I will probably do a X Spaces. So again, if you're not following me on X, make sure and follow me. So if I do an impromptu Spaces late Sunday night, you will know about it. Bye for now and have a great weekend, everybody.